A singing grasshopper, a tireless ant, a summer of music, a winter of hunger. To us, it is only a fable for children, a warning against laziness.
In a land not so
Simple,
far away, there lived
innocent.
a tiny, brave mouse.
But what if this little tale was never meant to scold children at all? What if hidden inside it lies the oldest law of survival? A code whispered by insects, carved into the bones of civilizations, carried across thousands of years of famine and frost. A code that asks not only who will live, but what it truly means to be human. Journey with me. Darklings into the forgotten origins of the ant and the grasshopper. Once upon a summer, the fields were alive with music. A grasshopper light as the wind leapt from stalk to stalk, bowing his legs across the violin of his own body. His song was laughter, ease the joy of endless sun. And beneath his melody, there worked another sound, the steady grind of jaws, the march of countless feet. The ants, tireless, patient. Grain by grain, they gathered carrying the weight of the coming cold in their tiny bodies. The grasshopper mocked them. Why toil beneath the golden sky? The world is full. The harvest abundant, the days too long for worry. Come sing with me. But the ants did not answer. They labored in silence as though obeying a command older than words. Then came the winter. The earth froze, the fields turned white, and silence swallowed the song. The grasshopper, trembling, crept to the ant's door.
Please, I need
Brothers,
shelter.
he begged, share with me
Feels
your
so
stores,
cold
for
out
I
here.
am dying. But the doors did not open, and so he perished in the snow. While within the ants, surveying fed by their secret hoard, to us it is a tale of industry and idleness, of reward and punishment. A fable to frighten children into obedience. But listen closely, darklings, for beneath the simple parable lies something
The
far
ant
older.
toiled, the grasshopper played.
This is not only
and
the
when
story
winter
of
came,
ants and
the ant
grasshoppers,
was prepared.
nor of work and play. It is the memory of an ancient ordeal, the oldest trial of all survival against the turning of the seasons. Aesop did not invent this story. He only preserved it. For across the world, in the myths of farmers, hunters, and kings, the same law was carved into memory: those who prepare endure, those who waste perish. And if we follow its trail, darklings, it will lead us back thousands of years to the very birth of civilization, where survival itself became a code written in grain, in famine, and in frost. Aesop did not create the story of the ant and the grasshopper. He was only a collector setting down words that had already lived in the mouths of storytellers for generations. When we trace the path backwards, the fable does not vanish. It multiplies, echoing in lands far beyond Greece, each culture reshaping it, each one repeating the same unyielding truth in a different form. In India, long before Aesop, the Jataka tales told of birds who faced the coming storms. One bird stored food before the monsoon rains, while another laughed, singing in the downpour, until the floods swallowed everything. The lesson was not framed as idleness or industry, but foresight. For farmers along the Ganges, life was measured by the river's moods, and survival belonged only to those who had filled their granaries before the waters rose. The ants of Aesop already walked here disguised as sparrows and crows, their wings carrying the oldest law of endurance. In the far north, the ordeal returned in harsher form. The Norse sagas speak of fable winter, the endless cold that precedes Ragnarok. In that world, a single careless season meant death. Squirrels became omens of preparation, their frantic gathering mirrored in human hands burying grain deep in cellars. Bears, sleeping through the frost, embodied another kind of wisdom, hoarding strength within the body itself. Here the grasshopper is not simply foolish. In the north, his refusal to prepare is nothing less than a sentence of extinction. Across the ocean, among the Hopi and Zuni of North America, the story sang again. In summer, cicadas filled the air with their endless drone, careless of the future. But when the nights turned cold, the song ceased, and the cicadas fell silent in death. Only the ants remained hidden in their tunnels with their stores of maize. Some Pueblo traditions even held that ants were teachers of humanity, showing the first people how to dig storage chambers beneath the desert earth. The lesson was sharper. Here music might lift the spirit, but music alone could not banish hunger. Seen together, these stories reveal a pattern older than writing itself, whether told by Indian monks, Norse skalds, or native elders. The structure remains unchanged. A creature of foresight endures, a creature of heedlessness falls. It is not only a fable for children. It is the collective memory of famine, flood, and frost carved into myth so that no one could forget. And yet the voices of myth are only half the evidence. Beneath the ground, the earth itself holds the other half. In Mesopotamia, archaeologists have unearthed clay jars of barley, sealed beneath temples stockpiled against years of drought. In Egypt, tomb paintings show lines of ants carrying grain, their bodies mirroring the labor of men. In Europe, charred kernels of wheat and peas lie buried in Neolithic pits 10,000 years old. Silent proof that hoarding against the future was already the code of survival. The tale of the ant and the grasshopper is not only a story. It is a memory of the soil, a reflection of practices that determined who lived and who perished. And if we keep following this trail, it will lead us deeper still into the birth of agriculture itself, where survival was no longer a matter of chance, but a law etched into the first civilizations. The earth remembers what stories forget. Long before fables, long before alphabets, survival was measured in seeds and silence. Archaeologists, brushing soil from broken jars, have uncovered the true bones of this ancient code. In Mesopotamia, the cradle of civilization, whole cities rose from riverbanks only because grain could be stored. Clay tablets record harvest tallies, rations, counted out kernel by kernel. Beneath temples at Ur and Lagash, great jars of barley were sealed like offerings to the gods, insurances against the years when the Tigris and Euphrates failed to flood. The ant's wisdom lived not in parables, but in the architecture of survival. To hoard was not greed. It was obedience to the oldest law of life. In Egypt, the pattern sharpened. Tomb walls are painted with endless lines of workers carrying baskets of wheat. In the same panels, ants appeared two tiny figures mirroring the labor of men. This was no coincidence. To the Egyptians, order in nature reflected order in society. The ant became a symbol of cosmic balance. Pharaohs themselves were praised not only for victory in war, but for filling granaries so their people would not starve. When the Nile failed, famine followed, and entire dynasties rose or fell, depending on whether the survival code had been honored. The fable of the ant was already written in stone 3,000 years before Aesop. Further north in the fields of Neolithic Europe, archaeologists have unearthed pits filled with blackened grains, kernels preserved by fire 10,000 years ago. These charred remains are not accidents. They are the remnants of storehouses, caches of food hidden beneath the earth to outlast winter. Some pits were sealed so carefully that rodents could not reach them. Others were lined with clay to keep out damp. These were not luxuries. They were lifelines. The farmers who dug them followed the same unspoken code as the ants work in the warmth, survive in the cold. Those who failed did not live long enough to leave descendants. Even the climate itself tells the story. Ice cores from Greenland show sudden plunges in temperature years when summer never came, when crops failed across continents. The Great Famine of 2200 BCE toppled kingdoms from Mesopotamia to the Indus Valley. What saved the survivors were not songs, but storage. Those who had prepared endured. Those who had not vanished into the dust of history. And yet the code was never purely practical. It carried with it a shadow of fear almost religious in weight. The first granaries were built beside temples guarded by priests. Grain was not only food, it was sacred, the promise of life against death. To waste it was a sin. To hoard it was to imitate the gods who themselves endured eternally. The ant, patient and silent, became a vessel of divine law. The grasshopper, careless and fleeting, a warning etched into the soil itself. So when Aesop wrote of ants and grasshoppers, he was not inventing morality. He was echoing an archaeology of survival that stretched back 10,000 years. Each seed stored, each jar sealed, each pit dug beneath the ground
to Aesop.
was another verse in the same unwritten hymn. Work while the sun is high. Prepare before the frost. Only then can life endure. But survival is never only about grain. It is also about meaning. And across cultures, the symbols of storage and song began to take on new layers. The ant was not only a worker, it was a mirror of discipline, obedience, even oppression. The grasshopper was not only a fool, it became the voice of freedom, of beauty, of art that defies hunger. From archaeology, we move into symbolism, where these two creatures stand not only for food and famine, but for the two halves of the human soul. From the moment the story was first told, the ant and the grasshopper were never only creatures of the field. They were mirrors held up to human nature. One crawls in silence, eyes fixed on the future. The other leaps and sings, intoxicated by the present. Together, they form a pattern that every culture recognized, a tension between necessity and desire, body and soul. The ant has always been the emblem of foresight. In biblical texts, the book of Proverbs instructs the reader to consider the ant, thou sluggard, praising its diligence as divine wisdom. To the medieval mind, ants were tiny monks laboring in silence, serving their colony with the devotion of cloistered brothers. In art and sermon alike, they stood for order, discipline, and the promise of survival through obedience. But this symbolism was double-edged. What is foresight to one is drudgery to another. The ant became the model of conformity, the cost of endurance paid with freedom surrendered. The grasshopper, or its cousin the cicada, held the opposite meaning. In Greek poetry, cicadas were sacred to the muses, their endless summer songs, a symbol of music untainted by hunger. Socrates himself praised them as beings who had once been human, but sang so beautifully that they forgot to eat, died, and were reborn as singers for eternity. In that transformation, wastefulness became transcendence. The cicada was not a fool, but an artist. To live only for the song was to embrace a kind of immortality, even at the price of the body. This polarity, ant and grasshopper labor and leisure, was not accidental. It was the map of survival written into myth. The Egyptians painted ants beside human workers because both were bound by the same law. Yet in Greek imagination, the grasshopper rose to divine heights because music was the one thing that could outlast death. These are not contradictions. They are the two halves of the same survival code, one for the body, one for the soul. Other cultures told it differently, but the tension remained. In Native American traditions, the ant was a guardian of the harvest, teaching humans how to preserve maize. Yet the cicada's song was remembered too, marking the pulse of the seasons, a rhythm as old as time.
Bringing in the harvest for our
To ignore the ants was to die. But to silence the singers was to lose the memory of joy itself. When winter loomed, the parable sharpened into ordeal. The ant survived, but at the cost of silence. The grasshopper perished, but left behind music that echoed in memory. To endure without joy was to become machine. To sing without bread was to vanish. The story does not simply warn of laziness. It whispers of the fragile balance between work and wonder, survival and meaning. And so ants and grasshoppers became more than insects. They became masks through which humanity asked its oldest question. Is it better to live long or to live beautifully? Is endurance the highest good, or is there something worth dying for beyond grain and frost? Look closely and the fable ceases to be a children's scolding. It becomes a myth of duality. Two paths, two destinies. Both true, both dangerous. The ant's code ensures life continues, but without song it may become lifeless. The grasshopper's song enchants the summer, but it cannot thaw the winter. Together, they are the riddle of existence itself, but the riddle does not end here. For in philosophy and religion, this duality was taken further shaped into visions of humanity itself. Bodies bound by necessity, souls yearning for transcendence. The ant and the grasshopper were no longer creatures of the field. They became symbols of what it means to be mortal. And if we listen to the voices of sages and poets, we may find that this little fable hides not just a survival code, but a map of the human condition. When stripped to its core, the tale of the ant and the grasshopper is not about insects at all. It is about the oldest tension in the human soul, to endure or to transcend, to survive or to live beautifully. The parable is a mirror of mortality, and philosophers across cultures have used its pattern to ask questions that no storehouse of grain could answer. The Stoics saw life itself as a winter always on the horizon. To prepare to discipline oneself to live as the ant was to align with nature's law. Marcus Aurelius wrote that men must train their bodies and souls against hardship because fortune would always turn. Endurance was wisdom. But others rebelled against this austerity. Epicureans argued that pleasure, like the grasshopper's song, was not sin, but salvation. To enjoy the fleeting sweetness of summer was not foolishness, it was to embrace the only certainty life allows. Religions carried the duality even further. In Christianity, monks praised the ant's labor as a metaphor for spiritual discipline. The faithful were urged to store treasures in heaven, just as ants store food in the earth. But side by side with this asceticism, Christian tradition also preserved the grasshopper's voice in another form. Music chant the soaring hymns that filled cathedrals. Bread alone could not save the soul. Song was needed too. In the East, the polarity was no less vivid. Hindu ascetics embraced the discipline of the ant fasting and laboring in ritual cycles to transcend the body. Yet Hindu poets sang of Krishna's flute, the sound that stopped the world in rapture, a song closer to the grasshopper's carefree music than the ant's relentless toil. Buddhism carried both halves as well. Monks hoarded discipline while teaching that clinging too tightly even to survival was its own form of death. And in the philosophies of art, the same conflict reappears. To work to build to endure is the language of civilization. Cities are ant hills raised to heaven, brick on brick, storehouse beside storehouse. But the grasshopper haunts these walls. Poets, musicians, and dreamers remind us that endurance without wonder is hollow, that mere survival is not the fullness of life. A civilization that silences its grasshoppers may last, but it will be lifeless. This is why the fable persists. It is not a children's warning, but a meditation on what it means to be human. We are both ants and grasshoppers. Our bodies demand storage protection work. Our souls demand song waste beauty. To choose only one is to fracture ourselves. The parable is not solved by condemning the grasshopper or praising the ant. It is solved only by holding them in tension, recognizing that survival without art is empty, and art without survival is ash. And yet the riddle grows darker. For in the face of famine, the choice is not abstract. History shows us that civilizations have fallen when they embraced the grasshopper's delight at the expense of foresight. Rome's feasts gave way to hunger, its spectacles to ruin. But equally, when cultures chained themselves only to the ant's code, they produced order without joy, obedience without soul. Which fate is worse, to perish singing or to endure in silence? Perhaps this is why the story endures. It is not just about ants and grasshoppers, or even about men and women. It is about the line between mortal and divine. For to be mortal is to store, to labor, to fear the winter. To be divine, perhaps, is to sing without fear, to create without thought of hunger. Humanity caught between is condemned to be both. And so, Darklings, the question remains. Is the true secret of the fable not about laziness at all, but about what it means to live? Perhaps the ant and the grasshopper are not enemies, but the two halves of our own reflection. And if that is true,
In its surface,
then another
the
ancient
ant
tale
and
one you think you
grasshopper
know may
reflections
also hide
fuse,
the same riddle
then
waiting for us to
recede.
uncover it. So perhaps Darklings, the tale of the ant and the grasshopper, was never a warning against laziness at all. Perhaps it was the oldest parable of survival, a code carved into memory long before writing, reminding us that every feast hides a famine and every song is measured against silence. The ant is not just a worker, and the grasshopper not only a fool. They are masks for us all asking how we will face the winters of our lives, with storage or with song, with endurance or with beauty. But they are not the only pair to whisper this riddle. Another fable, one you think you know, also hides an ancient secret. A tale of a hungry crow, a cunning fox, and a piece of bread that was never only bread at all. What if beneath its surface it carried not a lesson in vanity, but a fragment of an older code, one that shaped how power and persuasion ruled the ancient world? Click here to uncover the forgotten truth buried inside the story of the fox and the crow. I'll see you in a future shadow.